Your money patterns were set before you were 10 years old, and you've been running them on autopilot ever since. That's the claim, and by the end of this video, I'm going to prove it to you using your own behavior. Not in a way that blames you, not in a way that makes you feel broken, but in a way that finally explains why you do what you do with money, even when you know better, even when you've read the books, even when you genuinely want to change. Because the answer has almost nothing to do with what you know, and almost everything to do with what you learned before you were old enough to choose what to learn. Let's go back. You were somewhere between 5 and 10 years old. You didn't have a bank account. You didn't understand interest rates or mortgages or investment portfolios, but you were watching, constantly, the way children do, taking in everything, storing it. You watched how the adults around you talked about money, or didn't talk about it. You felt the tension that came through a closed door when bills arrived. You noticed whether money was treated as something scarce and dangerous, or something that flowed and could be trusted. You absorbed whether generosity was safe or reckless, whether wanting things was acceptable or shameful. You weren't making decisions about any of this. You were just recording. And your brain, in its extraordinary efficiency, took all of that raw emotional data and built a set of operating rules, a financial blueprint, not written down anywhere, not consciously chosen, just installed, running quietly in the background of every money decision you've made as an adult. This is what attachment theory, when applied to money, reveals. The same psychological framework that explains how early relationships shape how we connect to people, also explains how we connect to money, because money in childhood is never just money. It's safety, it's love, it's power. It's the thing that causes your parents to fight at midnight. It's the thing that determines whether Christmas feels abundant or tense. It's the emotional weather of your home. And you built your entire relationship with it before your prefrontal cortex was even close to developed. Now let's connect that to your adult life, because this is where it gets uncomfortably specific. Think about how you feel when your bank balance is low, not what you think, how you feel. Does it feel like a practical problem, or does it feel like a threat to your survival? Does it feel like information, or does it feel like proof of something? For people who grew up in financial scarcity, a low balance doesn't just register as a number. It triggers the same emotional state they lived in as a child, the hypervigilance, the low-grade dread, the sense that disaster is always one expense away. Their nervous system learned to treat financial instability as a physical danger, and it never got the memo that the situation changed. For people who grew up watching money create conflict, even the act of discussing finances as an adult can trigger a deep, wordless discomfort, not because the conversation is dangerous, but because the child inside them learned that money conversations end in raised voices and slammed doors. The association got wired in early. It runs automatically. And for people who grew up in households where money was never discussed at all, where it was a private, almost shameful subject, they often carry a strange paralysis into adulthood. They don't avoid money because they're irresponsible. They avoid it because they never learned a single safe way to engage with it. This is scarcity programming versus abundance programming, and it has almost nothing to do with how much money you actually had growing up. Some people grow up with very little and develop an abundance mindset, because the adults around them treated money as something that could always be found, earned, created. Others grow up with significant financial comfort and still carry deep scarcity wiring, because the adults around them treated money as something fragile, something easily lost, something to be hoarded and feared. The programming isn't about the amount. It's about the emotional meaning that was attached to it in your presence, repeatedly, during the years your brain was most open to being shaped. Now I want to introduce you to 4 archetypes, 4 distinct money personalities that emerge from childhood financial experiences. As I describe each one, I want you to notice which one sounds like you. The first is the hoarder, not in an extreme sense, just someone who holds on, tightly. For the hoarder, spending feels like loss, saving feels like safety. No amount of savings ever quite feels like enough, because underneath the saving behavior is a child who learned that money can disappear, and when it does, the consequences are serious. The hoarder is often mistaken for disciplined, but discipline implies a choice. The hoarder often doesn't feel like they have one. The second is the spender, again not in a reckless sense, just someone for whom money flows out as quickly as it flows in. For the spender, money often represents emotional relief. Spending is the thing that makes the feeling stop, whatever the feeling is. Many spenders grew up in homes where money was either absent or tense, and spending, when money was available, was the one time it felt good. That association stuck. Now every time they have money, the fastest route to that good feeling is to spend it. The third is the avoider, This is the person who simply doesn't engage, doesn't check the account, doesn't open the statements, doesn't make the plan. The avoider often grew up in a home where money was a source of conflict or shame. Their nervous system learned that engaging with money leads to bad outcomes, so the safest strategy became not engaging at all. The irony is that avoidance creates exactly the financial instability they learned to fear. The fourth is the worrier. The worrier engages constantly, but only to catastrophize. They check their balance, then they check it again, then they run scenarios of what could go wrong, then they lie awake thinking about them. The worrier grew up in an environment where financial threat felt constant and unpredictable. Their brain never learned to trust that things would be okay, so it stays on high alert, permanently scanning for danger, even when the danger isn't there. Most people are a combination, but most people also have a dominant archetype, the one that shows up most reliably, the one that costs them the most. Here's the loop I opened at the beginning, and here's where I close it. Your money patterns were set before you were 10 years old. I told you that. What I didn't tell you yet is what that actually means. It means you have been judging yourself by adult standards for behaviors that were installed in you as a child. You have been calling yourself undisciplined when you are actually running childhood programming. You have been calling yourself irresponsible when you are actually responding to emotional wiring that was built before you had any say in the matter. That is not an excuse, it's an explanation, and the difference between those two things is enormous. Because here's the shift: the moment you can see the archetype clearly, the moment you can trace the spending behavior or the avoidance or the hoarding back to what it was originally protecting you from, it loses some of its automatic power. Not all of it, not immediately, but some. You don't break the pattern by trying harder. You break it by understanding it deeply enough that it stops running without your knowledge. The 10-year-old who built those rules was doing the best they could with what they had. They deserve compassion, and so do you. Comment your money archetype below. I want to know which one you recognized yourself in.